Davis Warren had barely slept. He and his wife Cara received difficult news the previous day regarding their hopes for a new addition to their family, and they had spent most of the night trying to come to grips with the disappointment. There seemed little hope that they would ever have a child. Warren had struggled looking into Cara's eyes. He was powerless to ease her pain, nor his own. Duty had called, however, and Warren had no choice but to pull himself together and make the short trip to HQ. He was a psychologist who had gotten his start working with cops to ensure they were mentally stable enough for the job. He hadn't just been some coat-and-tie stiff who fumbled at prying into cops' minds, though. He had served as a beat cop before completing his studies and had witnessed firsthand the worst humanity had to offer. Warren's grounded approach and documented results offered him a unique opportunity to work as a government consultant, which ultimately led to the assignment that had required him to leave his wife at a time in which they needed each other the most. Shortly after arriving at work, he received a briefing that would shake his entire worldview to its core. He barely had time to process what was happening or question whether he was qualified for the job before he was thrust into the most challenging interview session of his career. She towered over him by at least 2 feet. Her skin tone was a deep magenta, her eyes intense green. She moved with a graceful ease that exuded strength in both body and spirit. Just being in her presence inspired a healthy sense of awe. Warren had to remind himself that her appearance may not have been accurate. The meeting took place in a virtual reality simulation coded to look like a pleasant little room with 2 deep leather chairs. The alien life form standing across from him was actually in a ship orbiting Earth, and her appearance was subject to the data transmission. For all Warren knew, there was no actual life form. Perhaps just some advanced AI that had come to take over the planet. Whether it was peaceful first contact with an extraterrestrial or killer AI, Warren felt obligated to make a good first impression. He wondered if he should offer a handshake, or perhaps bow. He settled on an awkward wave as he said, "It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Davis Warren. Welcome to Earth." It wasn't a big surprise when she responded in perfect English, as the VR software had most likely translated her speech. "Thank you, Dr. Warren. My name is Sorrenti. It is a pleasure to be here." "I have to be honest. I'm nervous as hell right now," Warren offered. "This is a monumental event for our people. I hope I'm not going to be a terrible ambassador." "We're in the same situation," Sorrenti said as she casually took a seat in her chair. "This is very important to my people as well, and I have personally looked forward to this moment for a very long time." Warren was a bit unnerved that she didn't elaborate. "I'm getting the impression you know a lot about us," he said. "We don't know anything about you, where you're from, why you're here." Through no apparent effort, Sorrenti pulled up a 3D interstellar map. "My home planet is called a stellar," she explained as she pointed out a blue sphere in a vast solar system. The room around them merged with the map. Warren found himself floating in the planet's orbit before hurtling through the atmosphere and soaring over a large ocean as he was taken on a virtual tour of the planet Stellar. There was too much for Warren to keep track of, but some sights stuck with him more than others. There was an incredible cityscape that seemed ecologically merged into a lush tropical locale, a massive white-capped mountain range, and a stunning turquoise river that carved its way through a dense forest of purple trees. "To be fair, it's an adopted home," Sorrenti explained as the simulation returned to the small room with 2 chairs. "My ancestors had managed to grossly overuse the resources of our original planet. They were forced to leave, and nearly 2 generations lived their entire lives aboard cramped interstellar transport ships while desperately seeking a hospitable planet. It was an incredible stroke of luck that our people found a stellar." "That is an incredible story," Warren said. "I can't imagine being forced to leave Earth." "We don't have to imagine," Sorrenti replied as she again altered the VR simulation to depict a crowd of aliens queuing up to board a small transport ship. They didn't appear to be as exotic as Sorrenti, but they were alien to Warren nonetheless. The sky above them was a toxic orange, and the crowds did everything they could to protect their faces from the whipping winds. The simulation shifted to show hundreds of similar transport ships rocketing through dense atmospheric storms. Sorrenti narrated, "It took nearly 4 months to evacuate all those who survived the planet's collapse. All told, a little over 5 million made it out." The transport ships blasted into orbit and converged on massive interstellar vessels waiting to make their long voyage. Despite the fact that our planet was dying, there were those who chose to stay behind, Sorrenti added. The VR shifted back to the planet's surface where a group of onlookers holding protest signs screamed terrible things at those who were waiting to board the transport ships. It took Warren a moment to realize the signs were written in English. One read, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things will not be remembered or come to mind." But Warren had little time to ponder that mystery, as his concern shifted when he spotted a 5-year-old boy in the crowd of protesters. Warren recognized this boy as distinctly human. "Okay, what is this? Is this some sort of edit?" he demanded. Sorrenti seemed pensive, as if she was struggling to untangle a great riddle. "You don't see the others in this recording as human?" she asked. If it wasn't for the sincerity in her voice, Warren would have been sure he was being played. He again reminded himself that her expression was the product of computer code. "They're clearly not human. I think I would know," he said with a confident drawl. Sorrenti studied Warren a bit before responding. "This is incredibly fascinating. For everyone you see in the recordings is every bit as human as the boy." "Okay. Are you really telling me that hundreds of years ago there were humans who didn't look human on a distant planet?" It was a crude response, saturated with sarcasm. Warren immediately felt a twinge of regret, but it quickly passed as he assured himself that they had delved into the absurd. Sorrenti, seeking to ease tension, smiled warmly. She patiently formulated her response. "I fear that what I'm about to tell you will create further aggravation. I am pulling the rug out, so to speak, but it is the truth. The recordings are not from a distant planet. The people you have seen were actually on this planet. My ancestors were from Earth. I am human." Warren became aware that he had lowered himself into the incredibly comfortable chair. He noted the scent of the leather and its plush texture. The sensory realness of the digital fabrication helped ground his thoughts. "My appearance should seem alien to you," Sorrenti continued. "I am the product of several generations of adaptation on our new planet. But it is incredibly curious that you do not recognize my ancestors, your ancestors, as human, especially considering there is no noticeable evolution in your appearance." Sorrenti initiated a new simulation. It depicted a vibrant green and blue planet covered with vast oceans. Warren at first assumed he was again being shown the planet as stellar, but there were clear differences in the land masses and topography. Then the planet's appearance began to alter in time-lapse. The oceans shrank, and the green eroded into torch soot as dense atmospheric storms obscured the surface. The simulation approached the planet's decayed surface. A sprawling but utterly empty city transformed before Warren's eyes. The buildings crumbled and were ultimately consumed by windswept sand dunes. Warren felt as though he somehow sank further into his chair as the planet that moments earlier appeared alien evolved into something he found all too familiar. He was seeing the scorched, dead earth as he'd always known it to exist. A beacon blipped in the distance. As they closed in on it, the faint outline of a heavy metal door peeked out of a sand dune. He knew on the other side of the sealed hatch was a labyrinth of underground tunnels and structures that were collectively known as the Ark. It was home to Warren and all the remaining humans living on the planet. "Since leaving Earth," Sorrenti explained, "our people have sent periodic messages in hopes of reaching those who stayed behind. A reply never came, so a return trip was inevitable. We just needed a way to significantly cut the travel time. Recent advances in technology provided the means." Warren rose from his chair and studied the simulated view of the bunker in which he lived. Forced to survive underground, eating lab-manufactured food and repurposed waste, breathing recycled air, the violence that took place over food and water, it all seemed normal to him. It was the only normal he'd ever known. "But the boy," Warren stated. Sorrenti changed the simulation back to the crowd of protesters and the little boy that Warren had recognized. The scene proceeded, and the boy was scooped up and held affectionately by an individual that looked quite alien to Warren. The boy's name was Kellen Thompson, Sorrenti began. We know this only because his father, Walter Thompson, was the leader of the movement against the evacuation. Mr. Thompson had worked for a company that created genetically manufactured food products. That resonated with Warren, as almost everything he'd ever eaten was genetically manufactured. Sorrenti continued. But Mr. Thompson held some radical views. He felt that the mixing of various cultures and ethnic backgrounds had caused the problems that plagued Earth. He and his followers believed that if a homogenized society stayed behind, Earth would somehow thrive once again. I've never heard of any of these people or any of this, but none of this explains why the boy looks human and all the others in this recording do not, Warren contended. Sorrenti then asked a question that caught Warren off guard. She asked if he had children. Warren initially felt a surge of anger. The disappointment both he and his wife were suffering was still quite fresh. But Warren managed to calm himself, and he explained that only a strict number of humans could live at one time in the Ark. Otherwise, the balance of resources would be thrown off. Therefore, aspiring parents had to petition for a child, and Warren and his wife had been repeatedly denied. What would happen if your wife became pregnant without consent? Sorrenti asked. Warren responded, I'm not sure I follow the question. Reproduction, Sorrenti said. You know, the whole birds and the bees thing? How do you account for unplanned pregnancies? Warren was flummoxed by the question. And that word, pregnant. He wasn't sure why she was using it in that context. I'm not following what you're driving at, Warren told her. The Ark can only support 4,000 individual humans at any given time. When someone passes away, a new child is created from the source. This seemed to confuse Sorrenti. Seeking clarification, she asked, You're saying everyone in the Ark was cloned through an artificial womb? You're making it sound clinical, Warren contended. The source has provided the means to create life. That's pretty miraculous if you ask me. Sorrenti paced the room as she worked through an idea. Once it gestated, she hastily asked, This may seem odd, but can you upload a recording of yourself when you were 5 years old? Warren hesitated initially, but after a bit of thought, he saw no harm in it. His VR setup wasn't as sophisticated as Sorrenti's, which meant he had to drop out of the VR and upload a recording from his personal archives. When he returned to the simulation, Sorrenti had rendered the 3D image of a 5-year-old Warren side by side with that of young Kellen Thompson. You look identical, Sorrenti proclaimed. You're a clone of Kellen Thompson's DNA. I don't know who Kellen Thompson is, Warren fired back. We were all created from the source. The source is what gives us life. Wait, if I'm understanding this, you're all created from the same source DNA? Sorrenti asked. Anger welled within Warren, and he didn't bother to try and hide it. He felt she was patronizing him. Sorrenti had picked up on his frustration as she followed up with, I'm only asking because I think that is why you recognize Kellen Thompson as human and not the others. You've never seen anyone who looks different. It's why the other humans in the recording look alien to you. This is ridiculous, Warren fumed. We look the way we are intended to look. We are all created in the image of the source, but we are all unique in our own ways. Of course, you would each have your own life experiences which would shape you in different ways, Sorrenti replied. But you don't seem to know how any of this came to be. Something happened to the other humans who stayed behind. Kellen's father, Walter, knew genetics. I fear he took his ideas about a homogenized society to a horrifying extreme by creating a new one with clones from his son's DNA. I think we have reached the end of our discussion, Warren said. Wait, Sorrenti pleaded. We are all human no matter where we came from or what we look like. We can bring you to a stellar. Everyone in the Ark can go home. Humanity's new home. You can go outside, swim in an ocean, feel the warmth of our sun. I will pass your offer along to my superiors, Warren said coldly. The Earth is not going to revive, Sorrenti said. We've run tests. The planet's ability to support life is completely lost. You and everyone that comes after will be forced to continue living underground. Think about future generations. Think about the child you and your wife want so badly. You could have that on a stellar. You could have an actual child of your own, not a lab recreation of someone else's child. Warren didn't bother to offer a goodbye as he dropped out of the VR. Back in the familiar gray reality of the Ark, Warren briefed his superiors on what he'd been told as well as the offer Sorrenti had made. There was spirited discussion on the matter. In the end, they decided unanimously to decline. Shortly after sending their message, Warren's superiors cut all communication with Sorrenti's ship. There were two things that were known by everyone who lived in the Ark. One was that the source was divine and would continue to provide them with life so long as everyone was created from it. Any anomalies had to be eliminated. The other was a prophecy that many had assumed was just an old wives' tale passed down through generations. It held that one day, visitors from another planet would arrive claiming to be from Earth, promising a better life somewhere else. But their real intent would be to destroy the purity of the human race by calling this source into question. That night, Warren and his wife, who was a female clone of Callan Thompson, the male Y chromosome replaced with a duplicate X chromosome, made yet another attempt at growing their family by saying their usual prayer to the source, asking that they be granted a new child. And that brings us to the end of Stasis. I hope you enjoyed the story. Comments are appreciated. And if you're interested in listening to more stories in the future, please click on the subscribe button. Thank you again for listening.